I'm pleased to say we now have the third largest social media following on Facebook of any county party in the state of Ohio. So he had a lot to do with that. He had most to do with that. And in fact, the fun part is he's the guy that gets to throw all the fun stuff up on Facebook. And then people come along and they say, Chairman, I really love that post. That was really awesome. I said, I sure wish I knew what you were talking about because I didn't write it. So he's done remarkable work for the Putnam County Republican Party. And together, I think, with our executive committee and our central committee, we're going to do a lot more of it. Tom?
Short Chairman. Our keynote speaker this evening was not invited to Putnam County because he is president of the Young America's Foundation, which he is. Nor was he invited to Putnam County this evening because he is a former governor of Wisconsin. He was invited to Putnam County tonight because he's a fighter and he's a man of action. My Republican brothers and sisters, you know as well as I, we are in a battle for the heart and soul of America. Bitching and moaning gets us nowhere. Action does. That's what this gentleman is all about. He's going on the offensive, and he's taking it to the American people, starting with the youngest generation. My pleasure to present to you Governor Scott Walker.
Thanks. Good evening. Thank you. Thanks. Well, first off, thanks, Tom, for the introduction, and Tony, thanks for a great night. Thank you for all sticking around. I appreciate it. You know, I was thinking when Brody was introduced earlier tonight, I was that same age 40 years ago today, and I can still remember Ronald Reagan was shot this day 40 years ago. In fact, I was a den chief. I remember coming after school over to Mrs. Brower's house. Any of you aren't familiar with scouts, den chiefs help the little Cub Scouts. They're kind of the assistant for the den mother. I assume they still have that these days. I'm an Eagle Scout, so I'm proud to say that as well. But I was over at Mrs. Brower helping the Cub Scouts, and we turned the news on. We were watching all the reports because, of course, the man who was elected in 1980, you think, and I wasn't born then, but 20 years earlier, in 1960, we had a president who was elected that year who was shot and killed. In fact, ironically, 100 years before that, we had another president who was shot and killed. So those things that go through your mind are this panic. Because even that day, even after the initial reports, we didn't really know what was happening to President Reagan. It was only later that we found out how close he was. We found out about how amazing the job of the Secret Service. Ironically, if you get in the weeds, you'll know that one of the Secret Service officers that pushed him in the vehicle and sent him to the hospital instead of the White House, actually as a 9-year-old got inspired to go into the Secret Service because of a movie then actor Ronald Reagan did portraying the Secret Service. Talk about God's providence. But I remember back at that time being completely worried, as all of America was, and of course he recovered. He even joked about it. He told the American people the only question he had when he went in for surgery was, I hope you're all Republicans, when asking the surgeons about their qualifications. But it was unbelievably close at the time. And obviously none of us then or now certainly wished that upon him nor the American people, because that was a pretty trying moment. But I remember in the time not long after that, this was already someone I admired, probably like some of you. I was, like I said, Brody's age, so I was young. I was 12 when he ran in 1980 for President of the United States. I remember 4 years before that, watching with my parents. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest of about 7,000, in my county about 35,000. 4 years before, I lived in Plainfield, Iowa, just down the road from our state representative, who was a farmer by the name of Chuck Grassley, who's now in the United States Senate. But we lived in a town of about 450 at that time, and I remember sitting with my father watching Ronald Reagan at the 1976 convention go up to that stage after President Ford invited him to come up, and watching the faces of all the delegates go, doggone it, that was the guy we should have nominated in 76, but it was not to be, because I believe God's providence was for him to be elected in 80. Sadly, to have gone through what he went through that day 40 years ago, because it transformed him. He was already destined to be a good president, but I think that day more than anything God reached out to him and let him know that unlike Kennedy, unlike Lincoln, unlike others in our nation's history, he was given another chance. Ironically, it was not unlike another great hero of that time, frankly, of our world, not just our American history, John Paul II. A pope, by the way, unlike today, a pope that actually fought communism, not embraced it, but a pope that stood with Ronald Reagan in fighting communism, because that pope knew from his homeland what it was like to experience the oppression of communism, not just politically, but in terms of religious, the atheistic viewpoint of communism then as it is today. And for both of them, it was one of those transformation moments that would otherwise have crippled many a person, but that moment where they each were shot, not at exactly the same time, but similar times in history, I think brought them together. And you look at Ronald Reagan, not just in fighting communism and all that led throughout his time in office, the time at Reykjavik where all the national media was really pounding on him, saying he had to come out of that summit with Gorbachev with some sort of peace plan, whatever it might be. Instead, he fought firmly for Star Wars, the Strategic Defense Initiative, which cost him any sort of agreement that day, but years later actually led to Gorbachev believing in that, essentially pulling back, the fall of communism, the fall of the Berlin Wall. All of that was a part of Ronald Reagan's legacy, and I think in many ways came from that moment. In fact, even later that year, in August of 1981, he fired over 15,000 air traffic controllers, which many in the media and many of in education incorrectly state that somehow that was about political retribution. It wasn't. A little-known Cliff Clavin fact here for tonight. PACO, the union that represented the air traffic controllers, actually endorsed Ronald Reagan, not just in the general election, but in the primary. So the last group he wanted to attack politically, but why did he fire them? Because it was against the law. Air traffic controllers, those federal employees, were in direct violation of the law by going on a threat to go on strike. He warned them repeatedly, they still went on strike, and he fired them, which could have had devastating impacts had things gone horribly wrong. But it didn't. He did it because it was the right thing to do. That only affected domestic policy. I believe the Kremlin at that point stood up and took notice. They said, this is a guy who's got, well, I won't say what he's got, but you know what I mean. I'm from a small town. I don't say things like that out loud. But this is a guy who's got guts. That's what I was going to say, right? This is a guy who's got guts. And I think that applied all throughout his time in office. In fact, later that same month, August 13th of 1981, Ronald Reagan signed the largest tax cut in American history. One, I love that just because he did that, because I actually think giving the American people back more of their money, like you guys did a few years ago under Donald Trump's leadership, has a dramatically positive impact, not just on our tax burden, but on the American economy. Because fundamentally, as conservatives, we believe that you do a better job of managing your lives and your money and your family than the government does. That's in the simplest form what the difference is between conservatives and liberals. We put our faith in the American people, the individual and the family. The other side puts their faith in the government. We couldn't have seen it more clearly this past year. I actually think we have a tremendous opportunity, by the way, as conservatives, to gain even more people to our way of life, our way of thinking, I should say, not just our way of life, because in particular, this year was one of those eye-opening transformations. One of the few, if any, silver linings of this global pandemic has been the distinction of the two Americas. Not those who like Trump and didn't like Trump, not those that are conservative or liberal, Republican or Democrat. I think it's more fundamental than that. I realize this is with exception, but I think in America today there's a huge gap between blue collar and white collar. Now, I think there are some blue collar or some white collar jobs, workers that understand what blue collar ones do, but I think all too often across this country, too many people in white collar jobs who are completely comfortable sitting at home month after month, sitting on Zoom while their kids were safely on a computer in the next room, not feeling any pain or anguish over the fact that our businesses and our schools weren't open, which, by the way, how crazy is it that our southern border's open but our schools are not? Right? Does that make any sense in the world today? But those too many, not all, but too many were living that life, not feeling a whole lot of threat, and were more than willing to give our government all this control, because it really didn't affect their lives. But people like my brother, who's a manager at a Quick Trip, which is one of the largest convenience stores in Wisconsin and goes throughout the Midwest, or people like my sister-in-law who sells appliances at Home Depot. Other than the first 15 days to stop the spread, to level the curve, have been working every day since then, or at least every week. They don't work every day, but every week they've been at work, right on the front lines, like so many other blue-collar workers all across this country. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity as conservatives to reach out to them and to their children. Children, particularly in school, who were put in a box. People like my family with my mother, who's in her 80s, who's a survivor of breast cancer, who loved to watch my nieces but couldn't because she couldn't be around anyone for fear that she might be infected. She wasn't there. Thank God my youngest niece is 13. In a week and a half will be 14. My other niece is 17. But I think if they were a few years younger, what would my brother and sister-in-law have done? What did many of you do? If your job is shut down because the government has told you you can't open up, what do you do? What do you do? One of the members of my cabinet who runs a large community center and a charter school in the city of Milwaukee in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, I went and had breakfast with her last August and asked her what she was going to do with schools, and she said, I'm going to open. She said, I have no choice. I live in one of the poorest areas in the state of Wisconsin. Overwhelmingly, almost 100% of my families, both parents work, they got nowhere else to go. If they don't go to work, they don't pay the mortgage, they don't pay the bills, they get kicked out of their homes, their kids are on the street, they can't do that, I have to be open. Where are the leaders in America who understand what the hard-working people of America need? This isn't about just the economy. This isn't about politics. This is about real people's lives, and we need to stand up as conservatives and say, we're the ones who understand your plight. It's not big government. It's not big unions. It's not big business. It's conservatives who stand with the hard-working men and women of America. We've got an incredible case to make to the American people if we just stand up and tell them. And so I tell you that with that transition with Ronald Reagan. And by the way, on your seat, I have a little gift in my new role. A year later, I wasn't in this spot, Tom, as you mentioned, but I'm, as of February 1st, the new president of Young America's Foundation. I won't go into details, but there is a calendar that's my gift, or really our organization's gift to all of you, from YAF.org if you're interested in it. It's a calendar from the Reagan Ranch. One of the cool things about the job I have, in addition to helping students at over 2,000 campuses across the country, even helping with high school programs and conferences and seminars and free speech activities and other things like that, we, since 1998, own and operate the Reagan Ranch. That's the actual home that President and Mrs. Reagan were in, the only place that they were in during their 8 years other than the White House. In fact, they spent so much time there, it was the equivalent of 1 out of the 8 years they were in office. Ronald Reagan said, if it's not heaven, it's in the same zip code. What I love about the Reagan Ranch, and we'd love to have you come as guests or in a group or whatever you might think about in the future. Some of you have mentioned having been there before, but it's both the frugality and the freedom that it embodied President Reagan. The frugality is the fact that the ranch house is about as small as you can get. In fact, it's about as the corner of this stage right here. The whole ranch house is about that big. Ronald Reagan, good Midwesterner. Think about these two up in the front. Midwesterner, all of us Midwesterners. Grew up in the Great Depression, didn't throw anything away. The only thing he had left over from the Corneliuses when he bought the ranch was 2 metal frames of twin beds. And being of that era from the Midwest, he didn't throw them away. He actually tied them together with zip ties, flapped a queen-side mattress over the top, and on his side of the bed, he was still too tall, so there was a wood bench put at the end of the bed where his feet would sit then, and all that is still there. So again, we'd love to have you come, but besides giving you that gift here tonight, I want to tell you this quickly and then tell you about an initiative we're doing to try and build off of what he talked about and what we care about here in this country today. Ronald Reagan, at the end of his term, 32 years ago this past January, he gave his final address from the Oval Office. And in his address, he did what you might expect after 2 terms in office. He talked a lot about where we were and where we'd come. I think about not just 40 years ago, but a couple years before that, when he wasn't the president. I don't know, again, about all of you, but those of you my age or older, remember what it was like back then. We were living in malaise. That's literally what they called it. We had oil embargoes, gas lines. We had something that hit home to me. We had hostages in Iran for 444 days. Kevin Hermann, the youngest hostage, a Marine from Oak Creek, Wisconsin, is a friend of mine. He's the former party chair in Marathon County, Wisconsin. Kevin was someone I knew, and so in our house we had a big old yellow ribbon around our tree that we had to replace about 10 or 12 times because it was up for so long. It was really bad. It was really bad. We were down and out. And when Ronald Reagan came in, probably one of the most significant things he did, more than just policies, he made us proud to be Americans again. He made us proud to be Americans again. And so at the end of his 2 terms, as he's speaking to the American people, he talked about all that, but as only Ronald Reagan could in his time. He gave us a warning for the future. Because you see, kind of like shoot Skeet, he was thinking ahead. He wasn't thinking at the moment. Those of you who shoot know what I'm talking about. You don't look at where the bird is, you look where the bird's headed. And so he had a vision. That's a little bit I want to share, that vision tonight, where the bird's headed, not just where we're at. Because Ronald Reagan gave a warning. If you get a chance, Google it, final address, Ronald Reagan. At the end of it, he said, I'm going to give a warning. He said, as much as we feel good about America again, we failed to reinstitutionalize it. And this is particularly interesting considering where the millennial generation is at. He said, parents going into the 90s are afraid to be unabashed in their love and support for this country and its principles. And he gave a warning about what that means. And at the end, he gave us a charge to go out and do more to teach American history and civic ritual. I was thinking about that in particular last month because I don't know if you saw this, but the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, Mark Cuban, actually announced before the NBA wisely overruled him that they were not going to play the national anthem anymore. When the honor guard came on in here, I thought about the small town I grew up where not only my parents, but my neighbor Claire Condon, Mr. Condon, who was a World War I and a World War II veteran, taught all of us scouts not only to stand, but to put our hand over the heart, not just when the flag came in, but when it came down the street in a parade, when they sang the national anthem, and to put the flags up on the tombs of all the veterans every Memorial Day, Veterans Day, and every other day, what was of significance. Because that was one of those shared rituals. It didn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. It didn't matter where you came from, where you lived. In America, that was one of the things like the threads in those American flags on our table that bound us together. It was a shared ritual. It was about being American. And I tell you that because part of the reason why I'm in this new position, not on a corporate board, not out making money as a CEO, nothing bad with any of those things, but why I went from being a 2-term governor, a 3-time winner in a state that was once blue and we've, at least for the time being, made purple, is because I know for the future of this country, we've got to get back to it's not just about party, it's back to conservative and more specifically American principles. Things that have made this country great and will if we return to them going forward. But we can't assume somebody else is going to do that. You see, because America today is under siege. We've seen it for decades in our college campuses, but it's gotten consistently worse. When I was in college, we had liberal professors, but you could still speak out. Heck, my kids are 25 and 26, and it was starting to change then, but you could still have a voice. Today, you talk to our college students, you can't say a word. We do a poll through Young America's Foundation that found over 78% of college-age students who are conservatives are afraid to speak out, not just for fear of bad grades from their professors, but from retaliation from their fellow students. That's what cancel culture is all about. They don't even want us to be heard. It's not just a matter of bias, it's about elimination. So we see it not only in our college campuses, we see it seeping into our culture, we see it increasingly even in our communications. With all the censorship, you were talking about this, Congress, all the censorship from big tech. Again, it's all about wiping us out, or afterwards they say, oh, whoops, you know, when we didn't let that New York Post story run about Hunter during the elections, we didn't really mean to do that, that was an oversight. Oh yeah, right. I mean, like anybody buys in there, believes any of that. This is all about censorship. When you have the President of the United States being taken off of one of the largest social media platforms in the world, no wonder even other world leaders who don't appreciate Donald Trump actually said, you know what, that's kind of wrong. That's kind of a big deal. That's kind of important. And yet most of corporate America sat on their hands. I thought that was an interesting point on that about corporate America. It's actually not just that they're Democrats, it's that the reason that corporate America are Democrats is because corporate America, sadly, is making their money by getting special favors from the government. That's all the vicious cycle that's out there. It's all tied together. And so when we look at all this, I said, you know what, we've got to fight back. We've got to fight back. That's something I know a little bit about, and you followed me along the way. Know that about the same time you were going through some of the big issues here a decade ago, we were in Wisconsin. I always like to tell folks, I like to point out the Occupy movement did not start on Wall Street. It started on my street in Madison, Wisconsin, where we had not hundreds, not thousands, but 100,000 protesters occupied our Capitol. I thought it was interesting on January 6th, when Nancy Pelosi lost her mind with what was happening at the U.S. Capitol, which what happened inside the Capitol itself was wrong, 100% wrong, denounced it immediately that day within an hour of finding out about it. But I went back and looked, and Nancy Pelosi not only didn't say anything about Wisconsin when we were occupied in our state capitol, she actually tweeted support for the people inside. People who are not only occupying our Capitol in defiance of the Capitol Police and the laws of the state of Wisconsin, but who issued death threats against me, against my family, against my children, against my cabinet, against our lawmakers. Some were so bad, I remember one vividly, still hits my mind how graphic it was. They said they were going to gut my wife like a deer. Another said that, to my wife, said that there'd never been a governor assassinated in Wisconsin, but if she didn't do something, intervene, I might be the first. And then proceeded to say where my kids went to school, where my father-in-law lived, where my parents lived. I got to tell you, probably like a lot of you here, instead of intimidating us, it just ticked me off even more and made me realize all the more reason why we need to do what we did. Which what we did wasn't about unions, it was fundamentally about taking power out of the hands of the big government special interest and putting it firmly into the hands of the hardworking people of our state. But because we were taking that power away, it's why they went, not just in my state, but why they shipped and bussed and flew people in from around the country, because they knew if taking that power away could happen in a blue state like Wisconsin, it could happen anywhere in the country. And so what that ties in today is in a way maybe different in scale, but I can relate and understand what many of our students are dealing with. And so we said what's happened here in our society didn't happen overnight. The left has been at it for decades. You go all the way back to Saul Alinsky in the 1960s. They've been at this for decades. And so undoing this, countering this, isn't going to happen just in a news cycle. It probably isn't going to happen just in a presidential cycle. We got to win the battles of the day for sure, and you all are engaged in that. But in addition to fighting the battles of right now, we've got to have a plan to win the war for the heart and soul of our republic. Because the left has the long-term plan. They've been at this for so long. I remember Bill Bennett warning this back during the Reagan administration. He said they've got a plan to take over education, higher ed, Hollywood, and media. And look where we're at today. That's exactly what they've done. But the good news is, you know, when I came of age, when I was Brody's age, Ronald Reagan made me not just a conservative, but an optimist. And I believe with all those advantages, if they haven't consumed every single young person, I see a number of young people even here tonight that inspire me, that make me excited about the future. It's why I love going to these conferences, because I see young people, including some who tell me they come out of households where their families were Democrats, but the more they got exposed to our speakers, the more they heard from our leaders, the more they went to our conferences, the more they read our materials, the more it opened their eyes. I think there's a dramatic opportunity. So our long game, in fact, in addition to having this free, if you want your own copy, we'll send you one of the long game. You can go to yaf.org. So yaf.org/long game. We'll mail you a copy if you want it. It's a 12-point action plan. I won't go through every detail, but it's simple things like we want to add 1 million more students to participate in our programs. 1 million. That's a big number, but we got a big challenge in front of us. We're already at 2,000 college and university campuses across America, but there's 4,000 in this country. I want to be at every one of them. I don't want to just be an undergraduate. I want to go to 2-year community or technical colleges, depending on the state determines the name, but it's where you get a 2-year associate degree. Because those are smart young people who want to get into the workforce right away, and I want to find a way to make them understand, hey, we're with you, not the leftists, not the socialists who want the government to dictate your lives and your future. We want to be not just in college, but and going into high school, where we have conferences right now. We got to go into junior high. And in some cases, we got to start as early as elementary school. I'll tell you something that's frightening. Didn't come from San Francisco. Didn't come from New York City. Just a couple months ago, we have a tip line that usually exposes these radical, out-of-control professors, that highlights some of the ridiculous things these administrators are doing with critical race theory, which, by the way, to me has nothing to do with race. It's all about trying to bring Marxism back to America, where they failed because we don't have a class-based society, so now they're trying to do it by imposing race and gender and other identifiable ways of pitting one group of Americans versus another to impose Marxism. But I look at elementary school, of all places, right here in the Midwest, Ames, Iowa. We got a tip from the students at Iowa State that said, you need to look at the local school district. So we did. And we found last month, beginning of Black History Month, that district, government-run school district, partnered with BLM, Black Lives Matter, which has 3 self-identified Marxist leaders. It's not me making this up. They've said it publicly. Where they went and partnered with BLM for a week of action that was little or nothing about Black history. Really nothing to do with Black history. In fact, in their curriculum as early as preschool and kindergarten, they actually gave coloring pages of transgender characters telling preschoolers and kindergartners they could pick whether they wanted to be a boy or a girl or something in between. Later in the curriculum, they talked about how fathers don't need to be a part of the traditional family. Not only is that just fundamentally wrong, it's wrong that they're trying to indoctrinate children that early in elementary school. But that's where we've gotten today. This is not some wild thing that you hear about in San Francisco. And I worry for the people of San Francisco just as it was there. But it's happening in the Midwest. We cannot allow this to happen. So part of our action plan includes giving our parents, even as early as elementary school parents, materials and tools to counter the indoctrination we're seeing from the radical left. Not just in extreme cases like this. Some of you have heard about the 1619 Project. Our schools and definitely our colleges and universities are teaching our students, they're teaching our young people to hate America. And they're raising their tuition to sky-high levels, which is why we've got a student loan crisis in America as well, to pay for things that fundamentally don't have to do with their future in ways that counter exactly those Judeo-Christian values that this nation was built on, that counter the very founding principles that made America great. So that's what the long game is all about. And there's more pieces to it. We want to partner with others. It's not just limited. We're not a political organization. Young America's Foundation, YAF, is a nonprofit entity. We come at it from a conservative standpoint. We don't get involved in elections. We leave that to groups like this County Party and others to do. But we partner. I was just with a statewide convention of college Republicans this past Saturday. So part of my appeal tonight is if you've got young people, whether it's in high school or younger, you've got folks going off to college, you want to reach out, get your copy of the plan, but most specifically help us get young people involved. We're going to have, for college-age students, we're going to have our National Conservative Student Conference this August in Houston, Texas. First time we've ever been out of Washington, D.C. Traditionally, it's in our nation's capital. It's exciting. It's dynamic. A lot of your colleagues and others in the House and the Senate come there, administration officials and others. But as you guys know, it's like a war zone. I've been all over the world to Afghanistan, the Middle East to see troops as governor. I got to tell you, the capital today looks worse than Kabul. I mean, it's that frightening. And so we said, we're getting out. The city's closed down. It's absolutely crazy there. We're going to a free state. In February, we were in the free state of Florida. We went to Miami for a Freedom Conference. And I'll just tell you this to wrap it up. So we chose Miami not just because it's in Florida with arguably the best governor in the country, at least the best current governor. I might like to compete with him a little bit. But for sure, the best current governor in America, Ron DeSantis, who despite all the crap he got from the media, has delivered by keeping his state open and yet still keeping people safe, which is what we're charged with doing, which, by the way, big mistake I think politicians at any level have made during the past year is don't tell people what to do, tell them why it's important. You know, the Bible tells you that in Nehemiah. When the walls of Jerusalem came down, God didn't tell them what to do before he told them why it came down in the first place. You understand the why, the what will happen. We're all smart people. We're decent people. If you put your faith in the American people, tell them why it's important to do certain things, and by and large, most people are going to do the right thing. But like teenagers, if you tell us what to do, if we don't understand why, the minute you're not there, we're going to go out and do something else. It's just that simple. It's human nature. I don't get why people didn't get that throughout this year, but it's one of those things. When we went down to Miami, I said, you know, Ron DeSantis has done the why better than just the what, and his state's doing that much better off, not just economically, but from a health standpoint as well. So we went down there. Well, we went to Miami as well, because I wanted to be close to an ever-growing and increasingly conservative Cuban-American population. So we had a bunch of speakers whose families came from Cuba. We had one whose family came from Venezuela. The reason I tell you that, and it doesn't have to be from those places. We've got people on our staff whose family came from the old Soviet republics. But if you can, particularly when talking with young people, find someone who's come here legally from another country, particularly if they've come from a socialist or a communist or former communist country. Because I tell you, God's honest truth, I don't think there's anyone in the world, in this country, who loves America more than someone who's come from a socialist or communist country. Most of them I know want to kiss the ground every single day I see them, because they know what's at stake. One of our speakers talked about his parents coming in through Freedom Tower, right at the tip of Florida, right at the southern, one of the most southern points in America, who came to America from Cuba, whose parents came here because his uncle, one uncle had been in prison for 9 years, the other for 18 years under Fidel Castro, someone who promised power to the people and instead provided poverty to the masses and power to the elite. You see that in Venezuela, where 9 out of every 10 people in that country live in adverse poverty. So bad, the average Venezuelan over the last few years has lost on average 20 pounds due to malnutrition and deprivation. You can physically see the ill effects of socialism. It's that bad. And so when we tell people that, I was telling some of the folks earlier, one of my biggest critiques of those of us on the right is that we think and talk with our head, and the left thinks and talks with their heart. Don't ever give the logic up, but tell it in ways that come from the heart. And so that's where I'll end. One of the most important things in the beginning of that quote's up on that banner under Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan years ago aptly said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction." You don't get it passed on to you through the bloodstream. You have to stand up and fight for it and defend it, and then pass it on to the next generation to do exactly the same thing. About a month ago, I was in Arizona speaking on this very subject, and it was the day after our beloved Rush Limbaugh passed away. And before I went up to speak, somebody, actually more than one, a number of people came up to me and said, "Governor, who do you think is going to replace Rush Limbaugh?" Some of you might be thinking that even tonight as I mentioned his name. You know, is it Mark Stern? Is it, who is it? And I said the best answer to that question then, as it is tonight, is it's not one person. It's all of us. You see, we've got a great story to tell, particularly to young people. The left, the radical left, the socialists, the people who believe in the government, they want to pit one group of Americans versus another. If you don't agree with them, you're racist or sexist or Neanderthal or you're, God knows what word they'll make up tomorrow. Because they make their way through identity politics by pitting one group of people versus another. Our message is simple. It's simple. We love this country because in America, we know it doesn't matter how rich or poor, whether you're black or white, young or old, no matter where you come from, whether you were born here or legally came here from somewhere else around the world, in America, freedom and opportunity are available for everyone. But freedom is fragile. It has to be defended and protected, and then as Reagan said, carried on to the next generation to do exactly the same thing. More than just winning elections, we've got to win the war for the future of this great republic. I hope you'll join us in that cause. God bless you. Thanks for being here.
Wasn't that terrific? Just terrific. The governor doesn't know, we actually decided to kind of cheat him out of some of his time because we went and picked him up at the airport in Detroit. We convinced him he was going to stay overnight in Findlay, so we're running him back over there after that this evening. And then tomorrow we're going to go meet with him again, and we're going to run him back to Detroit. You can't get 6 hours of time with Governor Walker unless you plan it out that way. So thankfully he couldn't drive here, and he didn't have any small planes. We have a quick gift we want to present to him. Adam, Gabby, if you join us. While they're in the process, I'm going to ask for help because we're that kind of people. Members of the Central Committee, if you would hang around and if we can get a few volunteers, it turns out they have this place rented tomorrow in the morning. So we don't have to put tables away, but we do have to put chairs on the tables and get rid of the, and Lynn will get rid of the tablecloths, but throw the trash away. If any of you want to hang around and give us a hand with that, we'd really appreciate it.
Nice speech without notes.
We decided to have a couple of Putnam County themed things for the governor. We happen to know that the governor is a big-time motorcycle rider, so now he's got a Ben Breeze Harley Davidson shirt. Gift basket here, specially prepared for him from Hunt Brothers Candy. Unfortunately for him, he told me he gave up candy for Lent. So, I don't know, maybe he'd want to pass it out. It's hard to say. One additional thing, I brought this Sharpie up here because we wrote guest speaker on the bottom of the banner. We're going to ask him to autograph that, and the company next year can join him right along with it. One of the most important things I learned from Senator McCauley was to eat fast if you're going to be in politics. The second one is make sure you have a small signature. It makes life a lot easier. So that worked out really well all the way around. I want to thank you all for being here. Wasn't this a great event? We sure enjoyed it. We love having you all here.